Welcome to the tutorial Compositing Your Scenes in a Third-Party Software. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to take the scenes that you've rendered from either Animate or Animate Pro and how to put them together to create either a full episode, introduction, trailer, or movie. So for this tutorial, I'm going to use Adobe Premiere, but you can use many different softwares that exist, such as Final Cut Pro, even After Effects, but I'm going to use this software because it's the one I happen to have. So after having launched Premiere, you get the window where you're able to open a project or create a new one. So I'm going to create a new project, and here's where I get to choose where I'd like to save it. Obviously, the interface will look different for every editing software. However, most softwares have the same basic menu options. So I'm sure there's somewhere where you can browse to find a place to save your scene. So I'm going to save it in the same folder we've been saving all our rendered scenes in, and all our rendered scenes, so our Karate Rabbit scenes 1 through 5, I now put in a folder called Source. So this is the folder I'm going to choose, and then I'm going to rename my project. And I'm going to rename it to Karate Rabbit Intro because essentially I'm making the introduction to a fictitious animated series. And then I'm going to say OK. Then I'm able to get my project settings. So I'm actually going to go into the General tab. So this would be the same as making a custom setting. And I'm going to choose Desktop. This is for me in particular. Obviously, you have to choose for yourself what you need. I know from my scene, it's actually at 24 frames per second. So obviously I'd like my new project to match the same frame rate as all the scenes that I have exported from Animate or Animate Pro. And if you're not sure what your time base is, what the frames per second is for your Animate or Animate Pro scenes, you can always go back into one of those files, go to the top menu, select Scene, and select Scene Settings from that menu, and you'll be able to see what your frames per second are. I also happen to know that my video size is 720 by, it's actually 540. So that changed our aspect ratio, but then if I change the pixel aspect ratio from NTSC to square pixels, it becomes 4:3 again. So the actual settings that I've created for myself are for computer use. So when I'm using square pixels, this means to me that I'd like to show my final rendered work on a computer somewhere or somewhere on the internet, because monitors are made with square pixels as opposed to NTSC or PAL, which are made out of rectangular pixels. And so obviously, once again, it depends on where you plan to show this animation. So for me, I also choose Fields Progressive Scan. And like I said, you'll have to do research into all these things for yourself, but I'm just telling you why I'm choosing what I'm choosing. I always keep the sound to 48 Hertz. I'm pretty sure that's because that's the maximum you can export from Animate or Animate Pro. So for me, there's no reason to make it any higher. It's just sort of having excess information. This I wouldn't worry about because these are for the preview, so this doesn't affect your actual scene size in any way. And then I can either rename my first sequence now, or I can rename it once I go into my project. So I'm going to do that. So I'll select OK. And a new project scene appears. So I'm going to rename our first sequence Karate Rabbit Intro. And in this case, I'm going to place all the scenes that we've rendered from Animate or Animate Pro in this one sequence. However, as you may have noticed, there are actually several sequences, or you can create several sequences for your project. So to import an asset, otherwise known as a video, you can right-click in this Project tab and select Import. So now as you see, we have our Karate Rabbit Intro Premiere project file in this Pack22 folder. And just as Animate and Animate Pro have a project file complete with some attached exterior folders, so does a Premiere file. So these encoded files, these two other folders, actually belong to your Premiere project. And I would put all of them along with your source, perhaps in its own folder, so that they always travel together. So I'm going to go into the source folder, and although I could actually shift and click to select all of these different videos of different file formats, I'm going to actually import them one at a time so we can go over how each file format is imported. So the first one, Karate Rabbit Scene 01, is an SWF. So I'll select that and then click on Open. And really it's as easy as that. So we can see that it has the video icon, so we know it's a video file, and that it has the original file name and file extension. So to bring it into my scene, I simply have to drag and drop it from this project tab into my actual timeline. And we can see that it's there now. Then what I'm going to do is import the next one. So I'll do the same thing, import. I'll go to the same folder, and this time I'm going to import scene 02A. And if you remember, I created a B, so I went back and I renamed this one to A. So if I click on that and then click Open, we can see that it tried to import the file, but now it says File Import Failure. And the reason it gives under the error message section is the file has an unsupported compression type. So I'm going to click OK, and then we're going to go back to that Animate profile, which is this one right here. It's the color scale effect along with the bird with the motion blur. So if we go to File, Export, Flash Video, as if we were about to do another export, we can then go into the video options and look at what kind of compression types there might be. And if we go in here, we'll see there actually are no compression types, which means that the software is already selecting how this FLV will be compressed. And this often happens. Sometimes there is an incompatibility between the video formats that you export and the third-party software that you're trying to import them into. It's not unnatural. It happens all the time. So if there were other codec settings, I would change them. If you don't have any more compression settings that you can choose from, I would just export as a different format. Or if you have a video encoder, an Adobe Media Video Encoder, you could encode your FLV using a different codec. So there are many options to solve this issue. So I'm going to say cancel in this case. And then if we go back into our Premiere scene and we try importing once again, you can see that under the FLV, I actually created an MOV with the exact same file name. So let's select that instead and say Open. And this time it opened without a problem. So I would take this and then drag and drop it into my timeline. So let's do that for another video. Let's import. And this time we're looking at scene 2B. So scene 2B is an image sequence of JPEGs. So I personally know how to import an image sequence into Premiere. However, if you're using another software, you might have to fool around a little bit, and that's okay. For example, the first time I ever did this, I selected the folder because I thought that was the most logical and said import folder. So here we have our folder with the exact same file name and all the JPEGs inside numbered correctly. And then my instinct was to click Shift and then click the last image and then drag the entire sequence into my timeline. However, if we then try to play this, you can either use the play button here or hit the space bar. You'll see that it's extremely slow, which means that all of these are actually rendered as images and not strung together correctly as an image sequence. This scene was not this long, it didn't drag out like this. So clearly this is incorrect. And I'm going to undo that. The reason this exists is because a lot of still images are used in video. It's not unusual to create a motion graphics project with still images. So it does allow you to import a series of still images. So I'm going to select this folder and delete it, and then try importing again, but this time correctly. So this time I'm going to select the first JPEG in this folder. And this time I'm going to select this checkbox numbered stills. And what this is essentially doing is it's allowing the software to know that I want to import an image sequence and that this is the first of that sequence. So if I then click on open, we'll see that a video file was actually imported instead of a series of JPEGs. But we see that it still retains the original file name and the .jpeg file format. But if I bring it into my timeline, we can see that in fact it is the image sequence and it's timed correctly. That looks about the speed it was when I previewed it in Animate Pro. So let's try our next file. And that's scene 3. So scene 3 is also a series of images, but this time they're PNGs. And this was the OpenGL render that I did. And if you remember, you were able to export OpenGL as either a series of images or as an MOV. So originally I did a series of images, but then I went back and I exported an MOV because this is the one file that happens to have sound. And obviously with an image sequence you can't have sound. So let's import the MOV instead of the image sequence. But once again, it is OpenGL, which means that there is no anti-aliasing, so the effects are quite harsh, as do the lines. So you can see right away the icon is different than the other icons. It retains that film strip to let you know that there's a video component to this file, but also the speaker, which allows you to know that there's an audio component. So then if I click and drag and drop this into my timeline, we can see there's a second part to this file. So these top channels here are for video. So we see video 1, 2, 3. You can always hide them or show them. You can lock them, etc. You can also do that down here for these channels, which are for audio, and they're divided by this big thick line. So I can also mute the sound, which is what I had here. I can, lock it as well, etc. And we can hear that volume here. So we still have 2 more videos to import, so let's try importing them. One being scene 4, which is once again an image sequence, so I'll select the first one, I'll click on numbered stills, and I'll say open. So let's bring that in. And the last one was the actual MOV that I had exported in the previous video. And we'll drag that in. So a few things that I'd like to do to clean up this area is I'd like to actually put some of these things in folders. I'm only going to have one sequence, so I won't create a folder for sequences, but I do have quite a few source videos. So what I could do is right click and select new bin, which just means new folder, and I could say video source or sources, it's up to you. And I can shift click and drag and drop these over the folder, so now I can always collapse that to make that look neater, like that. Another thing to know about the timeline here is this bar indicates where it's going to render to. So right now it's going to render to a full minute, but our animated intro only happens to be about 20 seconds. So you can always pull this until you feel it snap to the end, so it won't end up rendering those extra 40 seconds that we don't need. The other thing you can do is add transitions. Every software is different once again, but here we have just jump cuts. They're clean cuts between sequences, but you can always go into the video transitions folder here if you're specifically using Adobe Premiere. You can add cross dissolves, you can add a wipe. Wipes are pretty cheesy, but considering the look and feel we'd like for this animation, it might actually work in this case. So you can drag and drop that. It's going to repeat some frames, and it looks something like this. If you kind of remember that style of transition between frames. So a cross dissolve looks sort of like a fade or a cross dissolve, where it fades between two. So I might mute this just for a minute. And you can always lengthen those or shorten that period of transition as you would like. You can also import sound and put a soundtrack underneath our intro here. So what I'm going to do is import a sound. And if I remember correctly, I have some sounds from the lip sync chapter. So I'll open that. If I was importing a lot of sounds, I might actually create another bin or folder just for my sound sources. So I can drag that into channel 2 here. And that's quite loud, so let's bring that down a bit. So you can use several tools in Adobe Premiere. You can use the C to make a cutter, so you can cut your sound like that. You can use V as a keyboard shortcut to become the select tool. You can delete things by using the delete button. You can drag and drop them. And this works for both video and audio. You can even shorten the length of something just by grabbing the end and dragging it across, and you can feel a snapping. And then if we look at our video, it looks something like this. So our video looks something like that so far with those effects and that sound effect. Another thing you can do is actually drop the volume at this place where the rabbit starts to talk. So I can unmute this sound clip, and what I could do is uncollapse the audio 2 channel, and I can add keyframes to this channel in several ways. I can add them right here to the timeline, so I could go to the start of the sound sequence, add a keyframe, go along a bit, add another keyframe. I can pull this down to drop the volume a bit, go almost to the end, and then I can also do this in the effects control for this sound. So we can add a keyframe where the level is for the volume. We can go a little bit farther to the end, add another keyframe, and then we could drop the level, or raise the level in fact, to bring the volume back up to what it was. So something like that. So you can see once again that the preview is a little bit sketchy. That depends obviously on your computer and how it's able to handle this previewing, but you can always render a preview as well from here. And the last thing you could do is select the video clip that has the sound attached to it, right click anywhere on it and select unlink. And now the video and audio are 2 separate files. And you could always just delete the file if you decide all of a sudden you don't want to have any talking during this introduction. So I'm actually going to undo that and do a save. So the last thing left to do is actually to export our introduction that we've created here using a string of Animate or Animate Pro rendered scenes, a few effects, and some sound. So to do this, we'd go to the File menu and select Export Media. So any of those other options that you saw were actually exports to another third-party software such as After Effects. So here's where you can decide what file format you'd like to export to. So, MPEG, once again, image sequence, a QuickTime video, etc. So I'll stick to QuickTime. You can select your presets from here. I'll keep it at NTSC DV24. You can select what video codec you'd like to use from here as well. So maybe I would switch that to H.264. It's up to you. Or maybe even animation. I'm not sure. We could do several tests. This is the full size. Oh, actually, our frame rate, we wanted to stay at 24. We would like our height to be 540. We would like our aspect ratio to be square pixels. So for me, basically, if I made my project at a certain setting, I also want my export at those settings. So exactly what I see in my project is exactly what I'm going to see for my export. So I would change those settings here. Same with the audio. I think I would leave it uncompressed. I can choose by clicking on this link here where I would like to save this. So I'm going to save it right here in the same file as the Karate Rabbit project. I could also make a folder and call it renders. You can do all sorts of things like that. So I'm going to save. And then I'm going to click on the export button. So if you have the Adobe Media Encoder, I believe you can queue it so that you can do several of these. Say you have like 8 sequences, you can queue them all up and then render them all at the same time. So I'm going to hit export. So now if we browse to that location on our computer, we can see it's right here, and I can always play this in my QuickTime player.
What are you searching for? Deep in the night.
And there we go. So obviously there's a little bit of editing that probably still needs to be done to sync this video to the music, maybe a fade out at the end, something like that. But you know, that's what you would basically do to create an animation with multiple scenes. So that's it for the video tutorial compositing your scenes in a third-party software, and it's also the last video in the rendering video tutorial series.